So I understand that the nature of social media means that frequently information gets shared without being fact-checked. Folks can see a post that looks and sounds authoritative and share it, and very quickly it goes viral. Especially right now when people are looking for both hopecore and horror stories, creators can be kind of incentivized to share things without doing due diligence. And I want to take a moment and talk about two different claims that I've seen repeatedly in my comments over the last week, and I have seen other social media creators reporting them very uncritically as if they were facts. And I always try and have at least two credible sources before I share information. So let's take the first one. When we're talking about how we can push back against ICE, how we can protect our communities from ICE, we can defend our constitutional rights against these masked secret police that are sweeping through our neighborhoods who refuse to identify themselves, won't show a warrant, and are terrorizing communities all across America. Whenever I talk about that, people are like, oh, have you heard of those tow truck drivers that are towing these unmarked ICE vehicles, which are often illegally parked, double parked, etc. And I've seen TikTok and YouTube creators basically making hopecore content out of it. Videos like this one.
There's a group of tow truck drivers in LA that are going around and looking for unmarked vehicles, and they're towing them away.
Right, the claim being made is that these tow trucks are towing unmarked ICE vehicles. Y'all, I did a ton of digging, and I cannot find a single credible source for this story. This is shaping up to be an urban myth. In fact, I believe that the origin of this story is a post from a satire account on Threads. And I've seen at least one YouTuber who has taken that Threads post uncritically as fact and made a video about it. It's this post breaking a growing group of tow truck drivers in LA are reportedly stalking ICE convoys so they can tow away all the unmarked ICE vans and SUVs that get parked incorrectly the moment the agents get out and start looking for people to abduct and deport. This, I believe, is the origin of this urban legend. The Halfway Post is a halfway true comedy and satire account. The account itself says, I don't report the facts, I improve them. Comedy is cathartic in fascist eras. So as cool as this story sounds, it seems that it's urban legend. Much like the kind of hopecore content that the reason that only 300 members of the National Guard originally turned up in LA is because folks were refusing to be mobilized. They weren't answering their phones. That was not what was happening. They were just being mobilized in stages against the express wishes of the governor of California and the mayor of LA. And I definitely am not going to recommend that people do anything to a vehicle they think may belong to ICE. Because I'm pretty sure that in this day and age, that could constitute a federal crime. Again, I'm not an attorney. Right, and I've seen a couple of posts like this, was able to afford my California rent by reporting illegally parked ICE cars to the tow companies because they pay commission. Okay, that's pretty resourceful, but also maybe check out the consequences of your actions and don't necessarily attempt to replicate something that you saw in a 15-second TikTok video. Even though this story may not be true, that doesn't mean that there are not people all over this country who are actively resisting ICE in really creative ways. They are defending their communities against the lawlessness and intimidation of the American Gestapo, which calls themselves ICE. And I think it's really important that we focus on those verifiable, credible stories of Americans who are protecting their neighbors all across the country. People who are mobilized to stand against the cruelty and oppression of ICE. People who want to stand up for immigrants, people who want to stand up for the Constitution. There are so many good factual stories that we don't actually have to fabricate hopecore or urban legends. We don't have to do that. Okay, now that we've debunked that one claim around ICE, let's look at another one. Not a hopecore one, but a scary one that has been making the rounds the last several days.
They said DoorDash is giving these people locations to ICE. All I'm saying is, if you're an immigrant, if bump that, because we passed the part of the immigrants, they clearly not just going at the immigrants. If you from a different country, you better not be out here DoorDashing.
Okay, so I saw several videos like that, and lots of folks in my comments who were saying that DoorDash was cooperating with ICE. And I really tried to search this up. I know that where I live in Portland, a lot of our DoorDash drivers are immigrants. And of course, I'm always down to boycott corrupt capitalist corporations. I used DoorDash once in 2020, so like my boycott would not be doing very much, but I really wanted to search this up before I decided to make any content about it. And I couldn't find a single instance where ICE had cooperated or DoorDash had cooperated with ICE. I couldn't find any evidence that DoorDash was actively cooperating to have their drivers snatched up by ICE. However, that does not mean that ICE is not potentially utilizing the reality that a lot of people who work for DoorDash are immigrants. There have been a lot of Reddit posts saying that ICE is ordering DoorDash, and then when you show up that they will detain you. I definitely understand that fear, but that seems weird to me because you can't like request a specific driver. It just seems like a pretty inefficient way for ICE to attempt to round up immigrants. I don't know, it just seems like a pretty inefficient way for ICE to do their job. Not that they're the sharpest tacks in the box or anything like that. However, something that is really important to note here is that all of these gig worker businesses, Uber, DoorDash, Grubhub, etc., they've done basically nothing to protect their workers from the oppression and the terror of ICE. I couldn't find any evidence that they're actively collaborating with ICE or actively supplying ICE with information about their employees. But I do wonder if this rumor ties back to a report from March. This is from businessandhumanrights.org. Again, this is from late March of this year, and it's about how these corporations that make a shit ton of money exploiting gig workers and who knowingly employ lots and lots of migrants, including undocumented migrants, these companies like DoorDash, Grubhub, Instacart, Uber, that they have allegedly abandoned their promises to protect their delivery drivers from ICE. And specifically, what they mean by that is that during Trump's first administration, these businesses made public pronouncements about their fears around the way that the Trump regime was treating immigrants, that they promised to protect their workforces, and they backed those pledges with capital. Back in 2017, Uber put out a statement deriding Trump's unjust immigration ban and announced that it would create a $3 million legal defense fund to help drivers with immigration and translation services. At that time, Instacart's CEO announced a $100,000 donation to the ACLU. And he said that the company would pay for, quote, office hours with immigration counsels for employees and their families in need. Also back in 2017, DoorDash's CEO said that the company would give free food to any lawyers or advocates working this weekend to support immigrants and refugees. And what's important to note here is that during the second administration of Donald Trump, none of those corporations have taken a public stand on behalf of the immigrants who work for them. They've been really silent. And this is something that Leah Greenberg from Indivisible has talked about, the way that we as Americans have been incredibly disappointed to see corporations who were unwilling to take a stand against Trump this time around that did the first time he was in office. That they have been far quicker to bend the knee, or at least to kind of like try and make themselves small and hide and stay out of the way and refuse to take a public stand for the rule of law for their employees, to take a stand against tyranny. There's been far more capitulation and appeasement from corporations who during the first administration were willing to stand up. And that's very, very concerning. And so while I couldn't find any credible reporting to show that DoorDash or Instacart or Uber, any of these companies, gig worker companies, are actively collaborating with ICE, what we have seen is this chilling of dissent. We have seen this appeasement and unwillingness for them to stand up for the folks who work for them, who made these CEOs millions and millions and millions, made these corporations billions and billions of dollars. This timidity and outright cowardice that we're seeing this time around, I think that's a pretty good reason to want to not do business, to not want to give your dollars to those corporations that are profiting off of immigrants but will not take a stand to protect their workers. They're more worried about protecting their profit and the viability of their business under a fascist regime than they are about defending the very people who work for them from the tyranny, the oppression, the terror of ICE. So anyway, I just wanted to take some time and clear up both of those things because I had seen so many comments and a number of videos about both of those two issues. And it's really important, I think, that we are careful to fact check. I know that I don't always get everything right, and I try and correct if I make a mistake. But I do think if we're social media creators, we have an obligation to not spread rumors. But again, there are so many appropriate things for people to be afraid of that this regime is doing. We don't need to manufacture issues. And also there are so many good things that the American people are doing to stand up that we don't have to make up stories. The true stories are absolutely worth sharing, and they are myriad. Okay, please come back because I want to talk about what ICE is doing here in Oregon.